Okay, so in this video, we're gonna go through the balancing of the FeiyuTech Scorp Mini 3 Pro, which is not very different than the Scorp Mini 2 Pro, but there is a couple of differences. And obviously the first thing is we want to make sure that we mount the base plate correctly. I really like the small rig cases because they come with this mini screwdriver type of thing. Magnetized here, which is really handy. But anyhow, you want to make sure that the base plate is as far forward as possible because that's going to allow you the maximum range of movement back and forth, and that's really important. So at the moment I have a Canon M6 Mark II with a speed booster and a Canon L series 16-35, and there shouldn't be too much of a problem balancing this. The first thing that we want to make sure is that first we've got this axis balance, and as you can clearly see it's totally off, so we're gonna undo that and we want to shift it back. We want to make sure that this is balanced first. There. Okay, so we lock that and now we balance this. What we want to make sure is that when we tilt the camera on either direction, the camera stays, okay? So that's correctly balanced there. And now we need to, I personally like to lock this and balance the roll axis, okay? Now, essentially, this is the balance done. I mean, as you can clearly see, this is holding there. And what we could do now is we lock both these axes and we open this one, and we want to make sure that this is correct balance. So we push it back. That's still tilting forward. Okay, so that's now correctly balanced. You can add additional accessories, and this is something that you would probably want. Now, I like to use a lens hood, okay? Because, you know, especially if you film outdoors, you know, this is like having a mat box. Now, as you can clearly see, this is now throwing the balance off because I've added additional weight on top and going forward. So obviously that's gonna make the front of the camera too heavy. So I just need to, again, push it back. There. Okay, so that's done. Now, another thing that you might want to do is adding a wireless radio mic, which is something that I personally do all the time. And you obviously you can mount it at the top, you can mount it, I personally like to mount it on the side. This is gonna have an impact on the balancing, and as you can clearly see, this is now off because there is more weight at the back, and then I need to again adjust it. That's just about right, and I want to make sure that this is correctly, and as you can clearly see, this is now off. I need to push it down a little bit. There, that's just about right. That is balanced. Now, I'm fine with the with this axis. Now, look what happens when I release the roll axis, okay? Because I've added different accessories, this is now off balance, and there is no more room on the roll axis bar. I cannot push it any further into this direction, so this would be a serious problem. And obviously I haven't connected the wire to the camera, which that would be an additional, you know, few grams. But what you can do is get one of these universal counterweights and just clamp it onto the side of the gimbal, just like that. And as you can clearly see, now this is a bit too much, and now it's just a matter of taking one by one until you get the right balance. Okay, that's just about right. Now what I need to do is just push it onto this direction a tiny bit. Okay, so that's good now. I lock it there. That's not going anywhere. I would be happy with that balance. This one stays balanced, and as you can clearly see, if I tilt it forward, it stays there. If I tilt it backwards, it stays there. This is a well-balanced gimbal, and obviously now I release this, and I want to make sure that this is still correctly balanced, and as you can clearly see, this is tilting backwards. So I just need to push this in a tiny bit, not very much. There you go. That's that tiny bit. That's all it was needed, and we are good to go. The only thing that you might want to do now is to auto calibrate so that the gimbal calibrates to the payload, and you can do it manually, but I prefer to just do an auto calibration. And as you can clearly see, it takes a few seconds. The gimbal does a little bit of shaking so that it understands the different payloads for each of the axes or the motors, and that's it, done. So this is now a correctly balanced gimbal, and it works really well. Okay, so again, the same principle applies regardless of the lens and the payload. You need to make sure that all the motors are correctly balanced, and you can go into the menu and see for yourself whether you have all the axes correctly balanced. Now, what happens when you want to go vertical? So you just have to release this, undo this one, and then slide it. And again, the same principles apply here. Now, obviously, this is going to be now too heavy on the roll axis. So this is now going to be too heavy on this end. So I need to release the counterweights and lock this so I can play with it. And now center the weight. Okay, so I'm gonna lock that one there. It's nearly done now. Now, obviously, you're not gonna be able to balance this because obviously the camera is gonna be knocking the rear. So you just have to basically go back and forth on this one until it's more or less balanced based on the payload that you have. And obviously, if you do vertical, I would probably be doing something with a lighter lens. I wouldn't probably be filming with such a big lens, and it doesn't really need to be perfect. It just needs to be just about right. There you go. I'm happy with that. Let me just lock that axis. Again, we do the same thing here. That's obviously well off balance. Need to push it back. That's good to me. So we're gonna lock that. That's not going anywhere now. And if we now release this and then turn the gimbal on, it's gonna be perfectly balanced and we can do our filming, no problems. Now, personally, if you're gonna be doing vertical, I would probably go for a lighter lens. The smaller, the better. But this is how you do cameras. What happens when you want to balance a smartphone? Because obviously smartphones are very different than cameras. And this gimbal has a very unique mount for smartphones. And it mounts directly onto the gimbal. You lock it, and it's actually pretty straightforward. There is a USB port that you can connect, and it provides power to the motors for cooling, which is actually really good. And all you need to do is mount the phone, bring it as close as possible, and the same principles apply now. Obviously, we cannot shift the camera up and down and balance this. It's very limited. We have a little bit of counterweight here at the top, and I mean, it does give you some kind of adjustment, but the moment you start going into lenses and accessories, this is not enough. But you know, if you just film with smartphone and no accessories, this is all you need. And this is just about right there, so we can lock that, and we're gonna open this one, and obviously, as you can clearly see, this is now tilting too much in this direction, so we need to shift this sideways until we are happy with the balance. So that's good. And sometimes when you lock the axis, because of the latch, it throws the balance off. So that's one thing to always bear in mind. There you go. There you go. That's good. So we lock that also, and we want, oh, that's clearly off balance. We need to bring this forward. There you go. That's just about right. We lock that. Now we release both axes, and this is a perfectly balanced gimbal now. There you go. And can you hear this? This is because the gimbal is expecting a payload for a camera, but this is a much lighter payload. So let me just do a calibration. There was a very different payload compared to a camera, because obviously it's not the same to have this smartphone than this camera with a lens hood and wireless microphone. This is the gimbal balance. Now I'm gonna turn off this so that I don't get the noise of the fan on the microphone, but this is how you balance a gimbal. Now, what happens when you add accessories? Because this is when things start to get really interesting. So I'm adding an anamorphic lens with a filter onto a smartphone with a different mount. And if I mount this directly onto the gimbal, this is a substantial higher payload on this side of the smartphone compared to this side. So obviously this is going to affect the roll axis, which it literally goes all the way to the top, but it can take it. But it might be situations that it cannot, and you need to go back to using the universal counterweight. This is just about okay. And if I undo this one, as you can clearly see, this is way too heavy here, and there is no amount of adjustment or compensation that you're going to be doing here. So you just have to kind of live with that and assume that the gimbal is going to adjust. Let me just check. This is now too front heavy, so obviously we need to push this back a bit. Okay, so that's about right now. I'm gonna turn it carefully, lock this, and if I was to turn this gimbal on, it is going to balance it and it's gonna work fine, okay? But it's not really the best balance because this is too top heavy. And if you go into the gimbal itself and you go into the camera balance, you can clearly see that the gimbal is not perfectly balanced, okay? It will do in a pinch and it is going to work fine. And in most cases, I mean, this is not what I would call a very heavy payload. But if you have a really heavy lens with an ND filter or a number of filters and a lens hood or a periscope lens or anything that is quite heavy, especially if you start adding things like microphones to the top using the cold shoe mount that you have on the actual mount itself, things start to get a little bit heavy. Now, if that is the case, if that's how you roll, this is how you do things, I think the best way forward is not to use this mount, is to actually use the camera mount. And you mount it just as you would a camera. You look at there. Now you release this one. And on top of these, you just put a traditional smartphone mount. You know, doesn't have to be anything particularly fancy. We slide it back on. I like to slide this as far to this side as possible, because what you want to do is you want to mount the phone upside down. And by doing that, you are keeping the center of gravity as low as possible, and it's fairly centered to the actual middle of the gimbal, rather than having something quite heavy, that is quite top heavy, kind of sticking out. So look how much easier it is now to do this. I'm going to balance this, and as you can clearly see, it's too heavy on that end, so I just need to reduce it, just as I did with the camera. I need to get it to a point that this is correctly balanced. So that's good. I'm fine with that. Now I need to shift this back and forward. There you go. So if I keep it like that, it stays there. If I tilt it forward, it stays there. So this is a very well balanced smartphone gimbal. And I do the roll axis now. Obviously it's going to be too heavy on this end because I have this extra weight on there, but I just slide it to the left a bit more, and the latch, and this should now be perfect. There you go. It's a perfectly balanced smartphone gimbal. And let's lock these two axes, keep this one open, and obviously this is now off balance, so we just have to bring this forward a little bit. There you go. So this is good now. Just carefully tilt it, lock this, and we release both axes, and again we turn this thing on, and this is a perfectly well balanced gimbal. And if you now go into the balance section, it's gonna show you that it's perfectly balanced. There is no stress or strain on any of the motors because every axis has been correctly balanced. And this is what happens when you balance the smartphone upside down, and any camera app will be able to automatically flip the image horizontally and give you the correct display. And even if that's not the case, in your editing program, it's really super easy and it's not even processor intensive. And essentially, this is how you balance a gimbal, whether it's a compact camera like this one or a smartphone. And I really hope that you have found this video helpful. By all means, leave any comments below if you have any problems or any issues. I'll try to come back to you and hopefully help you or fix any issues. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs up if you found this video helpful. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you in the next one.